everybody. Welcome to the last segment of this year's Winter Evenings Talks. My name's Mariah. I'm the newest member of the Winter Evenings Committee, and it has been such a pleasure to be a part of it. The thing I like about the Winter Evenings Committee is that it reminds me of why I picked such an amazing spot to live. We're so lucky to have this type of thing offered, and I think tonight's speaker would agree. Many of you already know her, as she lived in Tunbridge for 40 years and still lives pretty close. Her name is Joan Feierabend, and she also was a teacher in Chelsea for 24 years and in Tunbridge for a couple of years as well. She'll be teaching us tonight about her art and how to coax out your creative spirit.
And before I start, I'd really like to thank the library for this opportunity to speak. The Tunbridge Library, having lived in this town for many, many years, the Tunbridge Library has become the heart of the town as far as I can tell. So much emanates from this building that's special, and it shows the town up to be this wonderful, wonderful place. And so thank you very much, Jean, and everybody else who works in the library, the food. It's just amazing. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to start with a quote from William Blake. The daily routine of most adults is so heavy and artificial that we are closed off from too much of the world. We have to do this in order to get our work done. I think one purpose of art is to get us out of those routines. When we hear music or poetry or stories, the world opens up again. We're drawn in or out, and the windows of our perception are cleansed. And I'm here to talk to you today about creativity and you. So that's because everybody, I believe, has a creative spirit. And I think the world would be much healthier if we treated our creative spirits much like we treat our bodies. It needs exercise, it needs daily work. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. I do want to tell you a little bit about my teaching career, because teaching did figure into how I turned out as a human being and as an artist. I started out at the age of 6. I sat next to a little boy named Elmer who couldn't learn his letters, and he couldn't learn his numbers, and he couldn't learn his colors, and the first grade teacher thought I would help him, and I sat next to Elmer for the rest of the year. And that was my first teaching job. Later, I became a horseback riding instructor at the age of 12. That was my first paid job. When I was in college, I worked with the aged handicapped, and many of my patients were very elderly, up to their late 90s, and most of them in their 80s or 70s, and they were all handicapped. So, and I worked with them while I was in college. And then when I graduated from college, I got a job teaching in the Rubella unit at the New York Institute for the Education of the Blind. And this is in New York City, 999 Pelham Parkway. And I was given a class of 4 to 5-year-old deafblind children, and they had multiple handicaps. That was last year that I lived in New York City. I moved to Vermont then. It was 1970. When I moved to Vermont, I got teaching jobs at Vermont College and Goddard College. I was teaching life drawing, I was teaching portrait painting, I was teaching oil painting, a bunch of adult degree programs. And then when my children were born and they got old enough to be in preschool kindergarten, and there was no preschool kindergarten teacher, I taught preschool kindergarten. And I taught Benjamin Wolfe. So, and then when my children entered school age, I got the art teaching job at the Chelsea Public School, and I stayed there for 24 years. And I come to you now as a retired teacher, full-time artist. Okay, well, I asked everybody to put their signatures on a piece of paper. And I want to actually do my best to show you the variety of signatures and the way people actually, there's one right in front here, and I asked everybody, and I think everybody did. I want to make a point that this is drawing, okay? And if you can do this, you can draw. And I want to remind you how you learned to do this. You first traced, then you copied, then you memorized, and then you practiced. That's how you do it, folks. So the other thing about this is that if you look at your signature and you look at other people's signature, you can even tell what kind of artist they would develop into. And mine's a good example because you can look around. Mine is this top signature, if you can see it. I write fairly legibly. I write every letter. And if you look at my paintings, you can see that painter would write every letter, right? And and it's not particularly pretty. I'm not about having an attractive handwriting. And some of these are very attractive. Some of these are minimal. And you would be able to tell what happens when you practice and practice and practice and stop thinking about what you're doing. You emerge. This represents you legally. This is a legal representation of you. And creativity is basically not a legal representation of you, but it is how you have emerged, okay? So I think that that's a very important point, and you should realize that everybody in this room could learn to draw if they wanted to. Now, a lot of people say that they are not good at drawing, or that they can't draw. I hear that all the time. I can't draw, I'm not good at it. The thing is that drawing is a skill, and you probably wouldn't learn to draw if you hadn't been taught the skill of drawing. You have to look at things in a certain way to be able to draw them. You have to, there's a trick of looking at things in a kind of abstracted way. There are relationships of lines, and it's very much the way you learned how to do these letters. It has all of the same elements of that. And the big thing about it is that you have to practice. You have to practice to get good at it. That's bottom line. Okay. A friend of mine asked me for a definition of creativity, and I gave her this long answer, and I won't give you that answer. I took some, I Googled it. and these were my favorites. Tapping into your soul and your intuition and allowing them to guide you to guide what you make. In other words, your intuition is what you're tapping into when you've practiced a lot. You turn something on, and I will talk about that more in a minute. But there are two others that I really liked: giving the world something it didn't know it was missing. And the third one is part inspiration and part motivation. Okay, you have to want to do it. But if you want to do it and you practice, you'll do it, and it'll turn out well. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about my own work because I developed as an artist not to be a showing artist so much as I was a teaching artist. And I used myself as a guinea pig in classes that I took. I would take a class and see how it went in, and I would learn how it went in, what worked, what didn't work, and I worked on it over and over again. And it was a very important part of who I became as an artist. The turning points that I had started when I moved to Vermont. After I had taught the deaf-blind children, I didn't do any artwork that year. And when I got here, it was as if I was a plant that hadn't been watered for a year. I was limp. and there was little life in me. And I was smart enough to realize that if I just started doing artwork again, I'd probably heal. And that's exactly what happened. I was interested in the figure, which wasn't popular at Pratt Institute, where I graduated as an underclass. I got my BFA there. If the figure hadn't disappeared by sophomore year, something was wrong with you. But I wanted to work with the figure. So I thought, well, I'm not at Pratt anymore. I'll just go out and do some life drawings. And there are a lot of classes around in the Upper Valley, and I signed up for every one that I could. And I took life drawing. And then I realized I needed even more, and I bought a skeleton. And guess what? The skeleton arrived in a marked box, and it was delivered to what now is I don't know what it is actually. It's at the entrance of Allen House that used to be called June's Mobile. And it was a gas station. And June called me up and he said, "Your skeleton's here." And I got my reputation. Okay, one of the most important people in my studying was a book that I can't recommend more highly. It's called Nicolaitis' The Natural Way to Draw. It has drawing lessons in it. It gives you a schedule of drawing. And I used my skeleton as my model because I couldn't hire one. And he has you do 65 gesture drawings in one 3-hour class, plus one 1-hour contour drawing and another half-hour contour drawing. He just put you through the paces. And I did this, when my kids were babies. When I'd get a chance, I'd do one of his lessons. And he would have you do memory drawings. You had to look at the model for 30 seconds and then draw it and not look at it. You had to do drawings that you were looking at, the contour drawings, you were looking at the object that you were drawing and you weren't looking at your paper. So there were all kinds of ways that you were training yourself to combine your hand-eye coordination, your memory. He just developed everything. And I went through this book, and it was a wonderful book. Then after that whole period of time, I got selected to go to the Vermont Week up at the Studio Center in Johnson, and they have a Vermont Week, and you go and they give you a studio and they feed you and you work, and that's all you do. And I couldn't even sleep. I was so alive there. And what I had done, I had gone to the Twopenny Circus up in Montpelier, and I had done about 200 gesture drawings. I had a stack of drawings like this, and I had 3 large pieces, rolls of canvas that were 5 feet wide and 6 feet tall, so it was 15 feet long. And I was going to do this triptych, which is 3 paintings that go together as one unit. I was going to do a triptych that was based on performance art. And I was going to have on one side, I was going to have the person who was a person who had a life, and there was a girl there who was reading a letter. The costumes were hanging on the side, and there was a guy in the back practicing juggling, and there was this big practice hall, and it was almost empty. The light was streaming in, and the performance was in the center, and it was larger than life, and it was these big masks like the bread and puppet theater masks, and the guy was wearing a raincoat, and he was playing cards, and he was pointing at a marble, and it was really odd. And the third painting, which was on this side, was going to be the evaluation of all of this. And I got up there with my paint, and I blocked these all in, and then I stood back and I looked at it, and there were the practicing people, and there was the performance. And then over here, where there were supposed to be these people, I thought I had painted people standing and watching and sort of, taking notes and, kind of having opinions. And I hadn't done that at all. I had drawn birds coming out of rocks, and it was a landscape, and I was like, whoa. And I thought, that's great, I'm going to paint that. So I painted that, and then when I got home, I realized that my painting was telling me something, that you do have to practice, and you are an individual. And in the center, the performance is larger than life. But where it comes from is primordial. It comes from the mystery of life. And it just emanates out, and you don't know where it comes from. You don't know how it happens. And I was so stunned that a piece of artwork taught me something that I never knew, something that I had done. And that was a huge changing point, because I wasn't drawing what I was looking at. What I had been used to doing was looking at models and drawing them over and over and over. Look, draw, look, draw, look, draw. And I got pretty good at it. But I knew that it wasn't where I really wanted to go. I wanted to go someplace else, but I didn't know where. And this painting was sort of going that way. So anyway, I did that, and I came home, and I was not able to replicate that experience. I was working all the time. I was doing this every day, and I had everything was done for me. How can you replicate that? And I realized that the best way to replicate it was just to start working, just do some drawings. And I made this little project for myself. I was going to do 6 drawings a day. I was teaching, full-time teaching. I was going to do 6 drawings a day for the school year. And I had several rules. One of the rules was that I had to do it. And if I didn't do it, I had to make it up. The second rule was that I couldn't judge it. And that was the most important rule. It wasn't about whether it was a good drawing or a bad drawing. It was about practicing and not judging. So I got behind 24 drawings, and I never did that again. And 1,680 drawings later, the school year was over, and my creative flow was unblocked. I would sit down, and whatever happened, I knew what to do. And I found that my mind was capable of endless imagery. And people haven't been going through this too much. This is 1 year's worth of work that I did the year I moved, the year I downsized, because well, for one thing, I'm a prolific painter, and if I painted a lot of paintings, I'd have to take tons of wet paintings over to my new house. I put them all in a box and brought them in my car, and 1 year's worth of work. But the interesting thing about this, and I will talk a little bit more, this is a later project. This is a fairly recent project. It's 350 drawings, daily drawings and inquiry. I never missed a day. Even the day I moved, I did a drawing. I could tell you which one it was. But before that happened, I was very interested in trying to find out where images were coming from. And I read this quote, and I wish I had the exact quote, but I have a close one, so I'm going to read that to you. I hope you don't mind me reading you these quotes, but this is from John Cage. He said, "When you start working, everybody is in your studio. Your past, your friends, enemies, the art world, and above all, your own ideas. All are there, but as you continue painting, they start leaving, one by one, and you are left completely alone. Then, if you're lucky, you leave. And that is truly what I wanted. So what did I do? I started dowsing. And here's my dowsing question card. I used a pendulum, and I did this for about 20 years. So this was not a brief period at all. And the reason I only have one of those here is that I felt like I hadn't done them, so I did them, but I felt like they weren't mine necessarily, that they belonged someplace else to people that wanted them, so I gave them away. And that started me on giving paintings away, because I never really wanted my artwork to be put through the rejection of a buying crowd. Let's put it that way. I wanted them to go into homes and to be looked at for longer periods of time, to be lived with and to be understood as, and you develop a relationship with the paintings on your walls. And you ignore them sometimes, and sometimes you're sitting there and you notice something that you've never noticed before. One of the things about this Dow's painting, which I'd like to point out, this was towards the end of the dowsing series. It was the next to the last series. On the back of it, I wrote down everything. I wrote down the time of day I started it. I wrote down the day I started it, and I took notes. It has a Rumi poem written on it. You can't read it. So I wrote it on the back, so you could read it on the back if you wanted to read it. This is the Rumi poem. And dowsing had me go through a lot of different steps. It would create a series. It would somehow organize a show for me. I never went out and asked to have a show. Somehow, whenever the series was over, somebody would give me a call, and they'd want me to show the work, and it fit, and it was perfect. And I don't know why that happened, but it was kind of miraculous. And I learned a lot, because what happened with these paintings is that I was to use paint very differently. Instead of mixing colors, and I was only to use the primary colors plus white. And this one actually is black, white and black. Dion says, hold it up. I used the primary colors, white and black only, and dowsing uses all the colors, so every place here has all the colors in it. So it didn't leave a color out. And it would have me put the pure color on, one pure color on first, the next one next, and so forth, and then I had to brush it out. And it gave me the instructions all the way through about everything. And that was a very interesting procedure. And each one of them had a little bit of difference. This series went together with portraits. At one point, I realized that the artwork, the Dow's paintings were sort of matching the sighted work I was doing, the portraits I was doing. All this time I was doing portraits. There's some examples. I brought some examples of portraits for you to see. And because portrait painting is a really good practice. So anyway, I noticed that the Dow's paintings were being paired with portraits, and I thought that was kind of interesting. And then finally, it was happening too often. So I asked the pendulum, "Are you doing this intentionally?" And the answer was yes. So I had a show with portraits and paintings, and I actually instructed people, because people have a hard time understanding artwork when they just kind of look at it. It just looks like a couple of circles and balls and stuff, a couple of, I had people look at the faces first, and I had all of the paintings in this one as if the people were involved with the viewer. in one way or another. Either they were talking to them or they were ignoring them or whatever, but they had an attitude in their face. And I said to pick one of them and then look at and then imagine yourself in a conversation with that person and then look at the other painting. And it was the first time in a long time I've ever been at a show where I was really excited about the way people were looking at the art. Mostly people come in, glance around, I don't think I like this, and go for the wine and dip. Wine and broccoli. And it's discouraging as an artist to have people just sort of, not look. So anyway, that was a really fun way. And people, I don't have very many left. And then this project happened, this drawing project, and then Dowsing actually booted me out. Said, no, more. And it was right in the middle of this painting right here. I got to a certain point and I had this feeling that it was not giving me answers, the way it used to. And I said, what's going on? And I asked. So I had to ask yes or no questions, but I figured out that it wanted me to finish the painting. So this is partially Dow's painting, and after that, the pendulum would not work with me anymore. So now all of these other paintings here are me without the pendulum. And as you can see, it's a very different way of putting together images. So at this point, now that I've gotten you through all of that, I would like to ask you as an audience to choose one of these paintings, and I will take you through how it developed. So if you would pick one, I will start pointing, and then if that's the one you want me to talk about, raise your hand.
That one's off limits because you've already talked about it.
That one, no, if you want to talk about that. So has everybody picked one? Okay, let me just go through. Let's be fair about this. This one, raise your hand if you want this one. This one. This one. Okay.
Well, me too.
Yeah, I think I should talk about that. This one. I can do two if you want. I can do two if we have enough time. That one up there. Okay. And the one next to it.
Actually, that's the one.
Okay. And then there's the Weaver birds. Okay. The Weaver birds, that I fondly call this my Ranger Rick centerfold. It only got one vote, so.
It's a great story, though.
It's a great story, though. Yeah, see, my Monday group, half of my Monday group is here, and they know the stories behind all this. They've seen every one of those drawings. These are my special people. Anyway, so I think this one got it. Okay, it started, Exhibit 1. This is a sketchbook that Max Dybvig gave me when he got back from, where was he?
New Zealand?
No, it was the southern one.
New Zealand or India? India?
No, where was he where he was studying Spanish?
South America.
South
Central
America. He was in South America, Central America. Anyway, Max gave me this book, and I started drawing in it, and then I decided I'm not doing any portraits anymore, and I'm losing that skill, and I want to practice that. And I decided to practice that blind contour drawing. And this sketchbook is only really it's best with pencil. So I started filling it with modified contour drawings. I did not look at my paper while my pencil was moving. I could look down and locate myself, but then I would have to look back up. And I just practiced that for this whole sketchbook, one after one. I draw every day, by the way. Okay? So that started this. And I Googled some facial images, and I looked for people, old people, because we have lots of lines on our faces. And I found a group of photographs that were done of homeless men. And there were such moving portraits. And at the same time, I was doing these paintings later on in the day, and I had this canvas that I had painted over. It was an old painting. I painted over it. And I thought, well, I'll put 3 of these homeless guys on there. So then I had 3 portraits side by side, and that looked kind of like, well, what am I going to do with that? And then I decided, well, they look like they're looking through something. So I had them looking through broken glass. And then I began to realize that this was about a life that was very, very hard to live. And I worked on it. Dion saw me working on this a lot. I went through so many phases of the broken glass and so forth, and I finally ended up with fire on the bottom. The smoke is not actually smoke that would come from fire, but smoke that would come from smoking a cigarette or something like that. So the smoke sort of represents to me sort of bad choices about, about life. One of the things that's not lost on me that a lot of our homeless are veterans, which is so disturbing to me. As a matter of fact, this painting is out of being terribly disturbed about what's going on right now in our country. And especially for people who are not, who have not gotten their lives into a working order. And and then the crows. Why the crows? Well, I'm doing my next project, which is already underway, is a community art project. And several of the crow makers are in here. Would you raise your hand if you are a crow maker?
Wow.
We have, we're making crows to be outside on a mound of earth. The mound of earth used to be weeds and a woodchuck coal and topsoil. And it's shaped a little bit like a whale with a very long tail. And last year, after the election, I was so disturbed about what was happening for the earth, I went out and I just wanted to dig. And I dug out all the witchgrass on that mound of topsoil. I felt better, but I wanted to put something in so it would look better. And I planted wildflowers and pumpkins and squash. Yep. And so the pumpkins and squash grew all the way down the sides of and this is a big mound. I mean, it's about as big as this room. It's a big mound. And it had a lot of pumpkins on it. And I had a pumpkin carving party, and we had jack-o'-lanterns facing up and down the east, Route 14 in East Randolph. And this year, I wanted to there are these rebar loops on this mound now, and I wanted to put crows and doves on it, facing up and down the road, just looking up and down the road. And I asked a group of people if they would help me, and I got some helpers, and now we have 18 crows and doves sitting in my studio, various degrees of finish. But these, I had to figure out how to make them so that they would be able to be put and stay and be outside. So I did some prototypes, and so I had all these crows flying around my studio, and I thought, oh, they would look good on the homeless men, and so I put them on the homeless men, and that's how that painting turned out to be the way it is. And so that's the backstory of that. Now, the other one that people wanted me to talk about was this end one here?
Yep.
Oh, interesting. Well,
Do you think the crows are commenting on on your homeless people?
Do I think so, or do you think so?
I'll say I think they are. What do you think?
Well, that's a good question, because I think that it's important. My response is important, because what I see in my paintings, you may never see, and what you see, I may never see, and that doesn't matter one bit. But I think that they add a kind of life. I happen to be a real crow fancier. I love crows. And I find them to be smart and humorous and just wonderful birds. And somehow their being there, they put a forecast of doom because they're carrion. And yet, a lot of these paintings are about life and the life cycle. This one happens to be about that as well. This one, actually, that you're asking me to comment on is really sort of interesting that you're asking me to. I didn't expect that. This is really a lot like my drawings. If you look in these books, you'll see that it's sort of, and the way it started, I just made some things like that across the page, and then I made them into characters, and there was this little thing on the space on the bottom, and I sort of thought of it as kind of like a caption, and I put some shapes in it, and I just play. I hope you realize I just play a lot, and this one went through a lot of stages too, but then it sort of shattered. The background of it is sort of shattering, and they don't have arms, which to me means you're kind of giving up a lot of control if you don't have arms. And then the things on the bottom sort of are almost figures. They're sort of like seeds, though, too. The beginnings or the startings over. I don't have a big story about this painting. It just sort of, and why is it monochromatic? I don't know. I decided to make it monochromatic, and I kind of like it. It's gradations. It's a lot of gradations, and the crackle is coming down is all one value, and then the background is a different value, so that it changes its relationship as it goes on through there. Is that helpful? Mm-hmm. Okay. Which one? This one? Oh, okay. Well, this has, if you look up at this closely, it has two skins. The lighter gray skin, it sort of looks like a flower from a distance. It has sort of like a center, and then it has these dancing figures. Well, here's a little secret about you. The way I keep myself upright as a human being, I dance to 80s rock every morning for an hour. and it's sort of like this, you know. So that's, I think that's what that's about. Those little bright lights. If you look at energy, if you lie out in the sun, don't do it today, but if you lie out and look into the sky and just let your eyes go into a gaze rather than to a look, you know, you just sort of relax them, you can actually see the energy in the air, and it's like twinkling lights, all twinkling lights. You know, I'm sure all of you have seen dust in the sunlight. It's a lot like that, only it's the reverse. The dust is kind of dirty, and this is kind of sparkly. And I thought that was a very energetic piece, so I put a lot of energy in it. So, and then it has these little, you may not be able to see it, but it has these little tiny red lines. And I think of bodies a lot. I think of the human body a lot in relation to the whole. I think of the human body and its network of nerves and blood vessels and all the things that are connected. And because I think that our bodies are much like the body of Earth, and that if something's wrong in one part of our body, it affects our whole body. And if something's wrong in one part of the earth, it affects the whole earth. And I think we need to know that. And I think I put that in that painting too. And that's what those red lines to me are. They're sort of like lifeblood. So anyway, that's the history of that painting. Any others, questions about any of these? Yes, Mike.
The sparrow and the...
Oh, the sparrow, okay, yeah. Well, this painting started out to be, if you'll notice, there are sort of bunny-type shapes and sort of bird-type shapes and leaf-like shapes back here. There's bunny, there's one there, there's birds flying this way. And when I first started doing that, I was layering paint. And I wanted it to be transparent layers, so some of them were way back and some of them were closer. And I got to the point where it was all painted, and I thought, well, it's not finished. So I decided to paint in a bunny and a bird, and I realized that this was about all the lives that live in a certain area. You know, there are bunnies and birds and leaves that lived in the past and so forth, but now these are alive now. These are the ones, and the name of this painting, if I can remember it, because I didn't write it down, and I have trouble remembering the names that I put on these paintings, Is It My Time to Live? My paintings are all questions. My painting titles are all questions because I think they give me answers. So I did have one last quote I wanted to say, and this is about giving away art. This is from Peter Schumann, Bread and Puppet Theater. The Why Cheap Art Manifesto. People have been thinking for too long that art is a privilege of the museums and the rich. Art is not a business. It does not belong to banks and fancy investors. Art is food. You can't eat it, but it feeds you. Art has to be cheap and available to everybody. It needs to be everywhere because it's inside the world. Art soothes pain. Art wakes up sleepers. Art fights against war and stupidity. Art sings hallelujah. Art is like a good bread. Art is like green trees. Art is like white clouds in a blue sky. Art is cheap. Hurrah. Great. And that's my talk. Thank you for coming.